The footage does not begin with tension. There is no dramatic score creeping in, no ominous camera pan, no slow-motion warning that something irreversible is about to happen. The camera is already on, steady and indifferent, capturing a room that has seen countless planning sessions, producer check-ins, and routine conversations that never made it past the editing bay. Fluorescent lights hum softly overhead. A folding table sits slightly off-center. A chair is pulled back, waiting. When Amy Slaton enters the frame, nothing about her screams catastrophe. To an untrained eye, she looks like she always has on filming days, tired, distracted, moving a little slower than usual. But there is something else there too, something quieter and far more unsettling. Her shoulders are rounded inward, as if she's trying to make herself smaller. Her gaze doesn't lift immediately to the people in the room. Her hands tremble just enough to be noticeable as she lowers herself into the chair. This was supposed to be a simple meeting. No one in that room woke up that morning believing they were about to witness the emotional unraveling of a mother confronting the unthinkable. The schedule for the day was procedural, almost boring by reality TV standards. A few updates. A few clarifications. Some routine conversations meant to keep production moving forward. Amy herself had been told very little in advance. Just another sit-down. Just another day. The camera operator didn't adjust focus. The sound technician didn't brace for raised voices or tears. No one counted down to an emotional beat. And yet, according to those who later saw the raw footage, this was the exact moment everything began to fracture. Amy sits in silence at first. She nods absently as someone off-camera speaks. Her eyes flick briefly toward the floor, then back to the table. She swallows hard. The words being said to her are careful, measured, wrapped in neutral language designed to sound informational rather than alarming. But meaning has a way of cutting through tone, and Amy hears what's underneath almost immediately. Concerns, patterns, issues that can't be ignored anymore. The conversation shifts, subtly at first, then unmistakably. The phrases become heavier, less abstract. There is no declaration, no official ruling, no dramatic announcement. But there is implication. There is possibility. There is the very real suggestion that if circumstances do not change, if stability cannot be demonstrated, if certain expectations are not met, then questions could be raised. Serious questions. Questions about her fitness as a parent. Questions about her children. Amy's face drains of color. She stops responding altogether. For several long seconds, she doesn't move, doesn't nod, doesn't blink. The room fills with a kind of uncomfortable stillness that only exists when everyone present realizes something has gone wrong, but no one knows how to stop it. Someone clears their throat. Papers shift. The camera keeps rolling. Amy finally speaks, but the words barely register above a whisper. It isn't a response to what's been said so much as a reflexive thought spoken out loud. I already lost everything once. Her voice cracks on the last word. No one interrupts her. She stares straight ahead, eyes glassy, unfocused, as if the room itself has started to dissolve. Her breathing becomes shallow, uneven. She presses one hand flat against her chest like she's trying to steady her heart, trying to physically hold herself together. I can't lose them, too. That is when she breaks. It is not the kind of crying viewers are accustomed to seeing. There is no build-up, no dramatic inhale, no wiping of tears followed by a confessional-style explanation. Amy slides out of the chair without warning, her body folding in on itself as she sinks to the floor. It is instinctive, almost involuntary, as if her legs have simply stopped working. Her sobs are immediate and violent. Her breath comes in sharp, panicked gasps. She curls inward, arms wrapped tightly around her torso, rocking slightly as though trying to shield herself from something invisible but unbearable. Words tumble out between sobs, disjointed and raw. Is this real? Are the cameras still on? Please tell me this isn't happening. They're still on. The red light does not blink off. The lens does not turn away. One crew member later described the sound of Amy crying as something they could still hear years afterward. Not loud, not theatrical, but broken in a way that made the room feel too small to contain it. Another said it felt like watching someone's worst nightmare arrive without warning and without mercy. Amy's hands claw at the fabric of her shirt. She keeps repeating the same question over and over, as if saying it enough times might change the answer. What did I do wrong? Her voice cracks completely when she says her children's names. This is the moment insiders would later say should never have been filmed. Not because it was uninteresting, not because it lacked drama, but because it crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. Amy was no longer participating in a television show. She was reacting as a mother facing the possible collapse of her entire world. At one point, filming pauses. Not because someone rushes to comfort her. Not because compassion overrides protocol. But because producers need to decide what to do next. When the cameras resume, Amy is still on the floor. Still shaking. Still crying. She looks up briefly, eyes red and swollen, and asks if being a good mother isn't enough anymore. The question hangs in the air, unanswered. Somewhere off camera, someone shifts uncomfortably. Another crew member turns away, unable to watch. A production assistant reportedly asks whether filming can stop for the day. The answer, at least at first, is no. Amy sobs harder. She asks if the show caused this. If being on television ruined her chance to protect her kids. If quitting would make everything stop. There is no script for this. By the time Tammy arrives later that day, called in urgently and without explanation, the situation has deteriorated further. Amy is inconsolable. Her voice is hoarse. Her body looks exhausted, like she's been crying for hours because she has. When Tammy walks into the room and sees her sister on the floor, the reaction is immediate and unfiltered. She demands to know why cameras are still there. She demands to know who thought this was acceptable. According to witnesses, her voice shakes with rage as she asks whether they're waiting for Amy to die on camera too. That question changes everything. It is the first time senior staff seriously acknowledge that this footage may never see the light of day. Not because it lacks value, but because it reveals too much. By the end of that day, filming is shut down completely. Amy is not escorted away by production. She leaves with family. The footage is flagged, copied, logged, sealed. And from that moment on, two versions of reality begin to exist. The one the audience will eventually see, and the one that is buried. The day after filming was shut down did not feel like a pause. It felt like an aftermath. The kind that settles quietly, leaving everyone unsure which step might trigger the next collapse. Inside the production offices, the energy was unmistakably different. Voices were lowered. Doors were closed more often than usual. Conversations stopped when certain people entered the room. According to those who were there, it was as if the entire show had inhaled sharply and forgotten how to breathe out. Amy Slaton was gone. Not just absent from set, but unreachable in a way that alarmed people who had worked with her for years. Calls went unanswered. Texts remained unread. Messages sent through intermediaries were met with silence or vague replies that offered no clarity. When Amy did communicate, it was brief and fragmented. She was not angry. She was not demanding. She was frightened. One insider later said it felt like Amy had vanished into herself. Behind the scenes, the footage from the previous day became the center of a rapidly growing crisis. It was reviewed once, maybe twice, by a very small group of senior staff. After that, access was restricted. According to someone present during one of those early reviews, the room was silent the entire time. No one took notes. No one spoke until it was over. And when the screen went dark, no one wanted to be the first to say what everyone was thinking. This was not just sensitive material. It was dangerous. Legal advisors were brought in almost immediately. Not publicly, not formally, but quietly, through side meetings and urgent phone calls. The questions being asked were no longer about storytelling or ratings. They were about liability, about consent, about whether continuing to film someone in that state crossed ethical boundaries that could not be defended later. At the same time, there was growing concern about what Amy herself might do next. Family members reportedly stayed close to her in the days that followed. She was emotionally unstable, exhausted, and deeply shaken. One source described her as oscillating between numbness and panic, replaying the same thoughts over and over. What if they take my kids? What if this footage gets out? What if I've already ruined everything? What haunted her most, according to those close to her, was not just the fear of losing custody. It was the realization that her breakdown had been captured, cataloged, and debated like any other piece of content. Even if it never aired, it existed. Somewhere, beyond her control. Meanwhile, production schedules were quietly adjusted. Scenes that had been planned around Amy were postponed or rewritten. Conversations that would have involved her were reassigned or removed entirely. On paper, it looked like routine flexibility. In reality, it was damage control. When Amy finally returned calls, she reportedly made one thing clear. She did not want to film. Not temporarily. Not selectively. At all. She told producers she couldn't trust herself on camera anymore. That she was terrified of saying the wrong thing. Of crying again. Of confirming every fear that had already been whispered about her. One insider claimed Amy asked whether the footage could ever be used against her in court, even if it was never aired. No one could give her a definitive answer. That uncertainty only deepened her fear. This is where the divide within the production team became impossible to ignore. Some argued that airing at least a portion of the footage would provide transparency. That hiding it might raise more questions than it answered. That audiences were already sensing something was off, and the truth, however painful, might be better than speculation. Others were adamant that the footage should never be released. That Amy had crossed from vulnerability into crisis, and that continuing to frame her pain as content would be indefensible. According to one former staff member, there were heated debates behind closed doors, with voices raised and lines drawn. Tammy Slaton, who had not been present for the original breakdown, quickly became a pivotal figure in what followed. Those close to the family say she was furious when she learned the full extent of what had happened. Not just at the situation, but at the system that allowed it to unfold. She reportedly told multiple people that Amy was drowning and that no one had stepped in soon enough. Tammy's relationship with production reportedly shifted almost overnight. She became more guarded, more confrontational, less willing to play along with narratives she felt were dishonest. Insiders say she repeatedly emphasized that Amy was not weak or irresponsible, but overwhelmed and unsupported. That distinction mattered to her. When filming eventually resumed, Amy's absence was conspicuous. It was explained away quietly. Scheduling conflicts, health concerns, family priorities. The kind of vague explanations audiences had learned to accept without question. But for those on set, the difference was impossible to ignore. And when Amy finally did return to filming weeks later, she was not the same. She moved differently, spoke differently. Where she had once filled space with emotion, she now shrank from it. Her laughter sounded forced. Her smiles came late and faded quickly. She asked questions constantly. What would be shown? What would be cut? Who would see what? One crew member later said it felt like working with someone who was constantly bracing for impact. Editors were given new instructions. According to insiders familiar with post-production, anything that even hinted at custody concerns, legal discussions, or emotional instability was removed or softened beyond recognition. Scenes were trimmed. Audio was muted. Confessionals were re-recorded with gentler language. Timelines were rearranged to blur cause and effect. The story being built for television was careful, sanitized, and incomplete. Amy's struggles were reframed as stress, exhaustion, adjustment issues. The sharp edges were filed down until the truth barely resembled itself. Viewers saw a woman who was tired, overwhelmed, maybe even unhappy. What they did not see was a mother living in constant fear that everything she loved could be taken from her. Fans noticed something was wrong, even if they couldn't name it. Online discussions began to shift. Why did Amy seem distant? Why were her storylines suddenly so shallow? Why did major emotional moments feel like they were missing context? Speculation filled the gaps. Depression, burnout, marriage problems, Few imagined how close the truth was to something far darker. Amy, for her part, retreated further into herself. Social media posts became sporadic. When she did post, the tone was cryptic, heavy with unspoken meaning. One message, later deleted, mentioned that being strong didn't mean being safe. That sometimes doing everything right still wasn't enough. At the time, it passed without much attention. Inside the production offices, however, the footage remained a silent presence. Locked away, access restricted, rarely mentioned, but never forgotten. One former employee described it as a ghost that lingered over every decision. Everyone knew it existed. Everyone knew it had changed everything. And no one wanted to be responsible for what might happen if it ever resurfaced. Amy continued filming. The show continued airing. Life on the surface moved forward. But beneath the edits, beneath the careful narratives and softened storylines, the damage was already done. And the consequences of that day were only beginning to reveal themselves. In the weeks that followed Amy's return to filming, the atmosphere around her never truly recovered. On paper, production was back on schedule. Cameras rolled. Call sheets were printed. Scenes were staged and completed. But something fundamental had shifted, and everyone involved could feel it, even if no one said it out loud. Amy operated as if she were walking through a minefield. Every question directed at her was met with a pause. Every prompt was carefully considered before she answered. The impulsive honesty that once defined her on screen had been replaced by something rigid and defensive. She spoke as if each word might later be replayed in a courtroom rather than an editing suite. Insiders say she frequently asked to repeat takes, not to improve performance, but to remove anything that sounded too emotional, too uncertain, too real. It wasn't acting. It was fear. Those closest to Amy say the breakdown had fundamentally altered how she understood the show. Before, she believed the cameras were there to document her journey. Now, she saw them as witnesses that could not be trusted. The idea that her pain had been recorded, reviewed, and debated without her present created a sense of exposure that never went away. She began second-guessing everything. If she cried, would it be used as evidence of instability? If she laughed too little, would it be framed as detachment? If she admitted exhaustion, would it be twisted into inability? Behind closed doors, Amy reportedly obsessed over worst-case scenarios. Friends say she constantly asked whether something she said could be misunderstood, whether a moment might be taken out of context, whether the wrong clip, released at the wrong time, could undo her entire life. Her fear wasn't irrational. It was learned. Meanwhile, discussions about the never-aired footage continued quietly at higher levels. Legal teams weighed risks. Executives debated responsibility. According to one insider, the footage was classified in internal systems with special restrictions, making it deliberately difficult to access. Not deleted, not destroyed, just sealed. That distinction mattered more than anyone wanted to admit. Amy knew it existed. That knowledge alone was enough to haunt her. Family members say she asked repeatedly whether it could ever be subpoenaed, leaked, or accidentally released. No one could promise her it wouldn't. In the absence of certainty, her imagination filled in the gaps with terror. At home, the impact was even more pronounced. Amy reportedly became hypervigilant with her children, monitoring every interaction, every reaction, every moment of frustration. She feared that normal parenting mistakes could be interpreted as failure if seen through the wrong lens. Insiders say she avoided asking for help, worried that doing so might be taken as proof she couldn't cope. She tried to be perfect, and perfection, under that kind of pressure, is unsustainable. Friends noticed she stopped going out, stopped laughing freely, stopped talking about the future with excitement. Conversations circled endlessly back to safety, stability, and control. She reportedly spoke often about wanting things to be quiet, as if silence itself could protect her. Tammy, watching all of this unfold, grew increasingly protective. Those close to the sisters say Tammy became Amy's buffer whenever possible, inserting herself into conversations, redirecting questions, and challenging producers when she felt boundaries were being pushed. This was a reversal of roles that few expected. Tammy, long portrayed as the volatile one, was now the first to draw lines. Insiders claimed Tammy openly questioned whether the show had crossed a line it could never uncross. She reportedly argued that Amy had been put in an impossible position, expected to perform vulnerability while navigating real-life consequences no edit could soften. While these confrontations never reached the screen, they reportedly strained Tammy's relationship with production in ways that never fully healed. As episodes aired, the disconnect between what viewers saw and what was actually happening grew wider. On television, Amy's arc appeared subdued. She was shown as tired, stressed, adjusting to motherhood and personal challenges. There was no mention of fear, no hint of crisis, no acknowledgement of the existential threat she had felt pressing down on her. But fans sensed something missing. Online forums filled with questions. Why did Amy seem distant? Why were her confessionals shorter, less revealing? Why did scenes feel incomplete, as if something had been cut just before it mattered? Speculation intensified. Some blamed editing. Others blamed Amy herself. A few accused her of losing motivation or gratitude. Each comment, each theory reached Amy through social media, compounding her anxiety. According to those close to her, she read everything. Each theory felt like an accusation. Each comment felt like judgment. Each rumor reinforced the belief that the world was watching, waiting for her to fail. Behind the scenes, the never-aired footage continued to influence decisions in subtle but powerful ways. Production protocols were adjusted without explanation. Mental health consultants became more involved, though their presence was rarely acknowledged on camera. Certain topics were quietly designated off-limits. No one publicly said why, but everyone knew. Former crew members later said the footage became a turning point for the show, even if the audience never saw it. It exposed the limits of reality television's promise. The idea that documenting real lives comes without real consequences shattered in that room the day Amy collapsed. For Amy, the consequences were deeply personal. She began experiencing anxiety tied specifically to filming days. Insiders say she struggled to sleep before shoots, replaying scenarios in her head, bracing for conversations that might spiral beyond her control. The anticipation alone was enough to exhaust her. And still, she showed up, because walking away felt just as dangerous. Contracts,
Finance,
public perception. None of it was simple. Leaving the show wouldn't erase what had already been recorded. It wouldn't guarantee safety. It might even invite more scrutiny. So Amy stayed, trapped between fear and obligation. The footage remained hidden. The story remained incomplete. And the woman at the center of it all carried the weight of a moment she could never unlive, knowing that somewhere, locked away beyond her reach, was proof of the day her life almost collapsed on camera. And the longer it stayed buried, the more power it seemed to hold. By the time the next production cycle began, the silence surrounding that day had hardened into something unspoken but permanent. No one referenced it directly. No one acknowledged how close everything had come to breaking apart entirely. Yet every decision, every interaction, every revised plan carried its shadow. Amy felt it constantly. She learned quickly which topics made producers shift in their seats, which questions were rerouted before reaching her, which conversations were shut down with a quick change of subject. At first, she appreciated the caution. It felt like protection. But over time, it began to feel like erasure. Her reality had been edited before it even reached the cutting room floor. She noticed it in small moments. A conversation that ended too soon. A confessional that never aired. A scene that should have followed naturally but was mysteriously absent in the final episode. Amy began to wonder if the audience was being shielded from her pain, or if she herself was being rewritten into someone easier to digest. That uncertainty gnawed at her. Off camera, Amy struggled to reconcile the two versions of herself that now existed. The one living with constant anxiety, fear, and self-doubt. And the one presented on television, muted, softened, and strangely distant from the truth. Friends say she felt like she was disappearing inside her own story. She wasn't allowed to explain. Any attempt to clarify her emotional state was gently redirected. Let's keep it lighter. We don't want to confuse viewers. That might be too much. The phrases were polite, but the message was clear. There were limits now. Amy internalized that message deeply. She began censoring herself even when cameras weren't around. She avoided talking about her fears, worried that saying them out loud might somehow make them real. The pressure to appear stable became overwhelming. In trying to protect herself, she started to feel completely alone. Meanwhile, Tammy watched all of this with growing frustration. Those close to the sisters say Tammy felt trapped between loyalty to her family and obligations to the show. She could see what Amy was carrying, and it angered her that so much of it had to remain invisible. Tammy reportedly pushed back whenever she could, insisting that Amy be treated with care, not just caution. But Tammy, too, was constrained. Her attempts to advocate for Amy were often met with reassurances rather than action. We're handling it. We're being responsible. This is for everyone's protection. Over time, Tammy began to realize that responsibility, in this context, meant containment. The show moved forward. Storylines progressed. Life continued. But Amy's trust never returned. She became increasingly guarded with production, responding to prompts with safe, rehearsed answers. She avoided emotional vulnerability altogether, fearing it could spiral into something uncontrollable. The irony was painful. Amy, once the emotional heart of the show, now felt like a guest in her own narrative. Viewers noticed the shift more clearly as time went on. Comments online grew sharper. Some accused Amy of checking out. Others speculated that fame had changed her, that motherhood had hardened her, that she no longer cared the way she used to. A few defended her fiercely, sensing that something unseen was weighing her down. Amy read those comments late at night, long after filming wrapped. Each accusation felt like confirmation of her worst fears, that she was failing, that she was being judged, that the world was watching her through a lens she couldn't control. The breakdown footage remained locked away, but its influence extended far beyond the room where it had been filmed. Insiders say it reshaped the show's internal culture. New rules were quietly implemented. Emotional escalation protocols were introduced. Filming could be paused more easily now, at least in theory. But none of that erased what had already happened. For Amy, it was too late for prevention. She lived in a constant state of hyper-awareness, monitoring her emotions the way one might monitor symptoms of an illness. Any surge of sadness or frustration triggered panic. What if this was the beginning of another collapse? What if she couldn't stop it next time? Friends say she became afraid of herself. The idea that her own emotions could threaten her family's stability was devastating. She began equating vulnerability with danger, honesty with risk. Slowly, she shut down parts of herself she didn't feel safe expressing. And the more she shut down, the more isolated she felt. There were moments, brief, fleeting, when the old Amy resurfaced. A spontaneous laugh, a candid remark, a flash of the openness viewers had once loved. But those moments were often followed by visible discomfort, as if she had revealed too much and immediately regretted it. Tammy noticed every time. According to insiders, Tammy tried to remind her sister that she was allowed to be human. That fear did not equal failure. That one moment did not define her worth as a mother. But reassurance could only go so far against a system that had already shaken Amy's sense of safety. As filming continued, the show leaned more heavily on other storylines. The focus shifted subtly but unmistakably. Amy's presence remained, but her emotional depth was absent. She became a supporting character in a story that had once centered on her. Behind closed doors, some staff members questioned whether this was sustainable, whether Amy could continue under this weight without breaking again, whether the show itself had become part of the problem. Those questions rarely made it past closed doors. The footage stayed buried. The truth stayed fragmented. And Amy carried on, trying to survive within a version of reality that no longer felt like her own. All the while, something was building beneath the surface. Because when pain is suppressed long enough, it doesn't disappear. It waits. The waiting did not make the fear smaller. It made it sharper. Amy learned to live with it the way people live with chronic pain, always present, sometimes dull, sometimes unbearable, but never gone. Every morning she woke up already tense, bracing herself for a threat she couldn't name. Some days she managed. Other days, the weight of it pressed so hard on her chest that even simple tasks felt overwhelming. What made it worse was how invisible it all was. To the outside world, Amy was still there, still filming, still smiling when expected, still showing up. That outward consistency became its own kind of trap, because the more she appeared fine, the less room there was to admit she wasn't. Family members noticed the changes first. They saw how tightly Amy held onto her children, how she hovered, how every small cry sent her into panic. They saw how she replayed conversations over and over, questioning every word she had said, wondering how it might be interpreted by someone watching from the outside. According to those close to her, Amy began to live as if she were constantly being evaluated. Not by cameras, by consequences. The fear of losing her children had rewired her thinking. Every decision felt loaded. Every mistake felt catastrophic. If she raised her voice even slightly, she would spiral afterward, convinced she had crossed an invisible line. If she felt exhausted, she berated herself for not being stronger. Rest began to feel like negligence, and guilt became constant. Insiders say Amy often spoke about feeling undeserving of grace. That once you've come that close to losing everything, you don't get to be tired. You don't get to fall apart. You don't get to ask for understanding. You just have to prove, over and over, that you're worthy. The problem was, no amount of proving ever felt like enough. Tammy remained one of the few people who could see how much Amy was unraveling behind the scenes. According to sources, Tammy pushed for breaks, for space, for boundaries that didn't involve contracts or ratings. She encouraged Amy to talk to professionals, to prioritize herself in ways the show never could. But Amy hesitated. Part of her feared that seeking help would only reinforce the very doubts she was trying to outrun. That admitting she was struggling would somehow validate the concerns that had nearly taken everything from her. So instead, she tried to handle it alone. That isolation took a toll. Friends say Amy's world slowly shrank. She declined invitations, stopped reaching out. Conversations became surface level. She laughed when expected, nodded when appropriate, but rarely let anyone close enough to see how fragile she felt. Even with Tammy, there were limits. Because Tammy had been there that day. Tammy had seen what happened when emotions spiraled out of control in front of cameras. Amy knew that Tammy understood, but she also knew that Tammy carried her own scars from that moment. Talking about it felt like reopening a wound neither of them knew how to heal. So it stayed unspoken. The footage remained unseen, but its presence was felt in every silence between them. As months passed, Amy began experiencing moments that frightened her. Sudden waves of panic with no clear trigger. A racing heart during routine filming. A sense of detachment, as if she were watching herself from the outside. According to insiders, she sometimes described feeling unreal, like her life was happening without her permission. Those moments scared her more than anything else, because they reminded her of that day. The day when control vanished. The day when fear took over completely. She worried constantly that it could happen again, that another breakdown might come without warning, and this time, there would be no one to shut the cameras off. The thought haunted her. Production noticed the change. Crew members say Amy became hyper-alert during shoots, watching reactions closely, gauging whether something she said landed wrong. She asked more questions than ever before. What are we filming today? How long will this take? Will this be used? At first, the questions were answered patiently. Later, they became a problem. According to insiders, some producers grew frustrated with what they perceived as resistance. Amy was still doing her job, but not the way she used to. The spontaneity was gone. The vulnerability was gone. And without those elements, the show lost something it depended on. Quietly, pressure returned. Not overtly. Not aggressively. Just enough to be felt. Subtle nudges, carefully worded prompts, suggestions that she open up a little, that viewers wanted authenticity, that honesty mattered. Amy heard those words and felt sick, because honesty had nearly cost her everything. She began to feel trapped between two impossible choices: protect herself and risk becoming irrelevant, or open up and risk losing the only thing that truly mattered. There was no version of this where she felt safe. At home, the strain manifested in exhaustion, emotional and physical. Insiders say Amy cried in private more often than anyone realized. Not dramatic breakdowns, quiet, desperate releases in moments when no one was watching. She felt weak for needing them and ashamed for having them. She told herself she had already used up her right to fall apart. The never-aired footage had taken that from her. It had taught her that there was a limit to how much pain could be shown before it became dangerous. And once you crossed that limit, you didn't get understanding, you got consequences. Amy lived every day trying not to cross it again. But pressure doesn't disappear when it's ignored. It accumulates. And somewhere beneath the surface, something was beginning to crack. The cracks didn't announce themselves all at once. They appeared in moments so small that, at first, even Amy didn't recognize them for what they were. It started with exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. No matter how early she went to bed or how carefully she planned her days, Amy woke up already depleted. Her body felt heavy, her thoughts sluggish, her emotions dulled as if wrapped in cotton. She told herself it was normal. Parenting was hard, filming was draining, life was overwhelming. But deep down, she sensed something else was happening. She was burning out. The constant vigilance, the self-monitoring, the fear of missteps had turned her life into a performance she could never step away from. Even in moments meant to be private, she felt watched, not by cameras, but by the memory of them. That memory had a voice. It whispered that one wrong moment could undo everything. That stability was fragile. That safety was conditional. Amy began to lose trust in her own instincts. Decisions that once came naturally now required endless second-guessing. She worried about how things looked rather than how they felt, whether a choice was safe rather than whether it was right. That kind of thinking is exhausting. According to insiders, Amy started experiencing emotional numbness alongside her anxiety. She described feeling disconnected from moments that should have brought joy. Milestones felt muted. Laughter felt hollow. Even love sometimes felt distant, as though she were watching it happen rather than fully participating. That scared her, because it made her question herself in ways she had never questioned before. Was she failing her children emotionally? Was something broken in her? Was this the price of surviving that day? She didn't know. And not knowing was unbearable. Tammy noticed before anyone else did. Those close to the sisters say Tammy sensed the shift in Amy's energy long before it became obvious. The humor they once shared felt strained. Conversations stalled. Amy was physically present, but emotionally elsewhere. Tammy tried to reach her. She asked direct questions, offered blunt reassurances, pushed her sister to stop carrying everything alone. But Amy resisted, not because she didn't trust Tammy, but because she didn't trust herself. She was afraid that if she let herself feel fully again, everything she'd worked so hard to hold together would collapse. The fear had become reflexive, and it was shaping everything. Production schedules continued. Life went on. But Amy moved through it like someone holding their breath underwater, counting the seconds until they could resurface. Only there was no clear moment when it was safe to breathe again. Crew members began noticing the strain more clearly. Amy's patience was thinner, her reaction slower. There were moments when she seemed on the verge of tears over things that would once have rolled off her back. When asked if she was okay, she smiled and said yes. Always yes. Because no felt dangerous. Off camera, Amy's internal dialogue grew harsher. She criticized herself relentlessly for not being strong enough, for not bouncing back faster, for letting fear control her. The compassion she once showed herself had disappeared. In its place was survival mode. Survival mode doesn't allow softness. It doesn't allow rest. It doesn't allow mistakes. And it certainly doesn't allow vulnerability. The irony was painful. Amy had built her public identity on being open, emotional, and real. Now those very traits felt like liabilities. She began to feel like a stranger to herself. Family members grew increasingly concerned. According to sources, there were conversations about whether Amy needed to step back, take time, reevaluate. But the logistics were complicated. Contracts, expectations, financial pressure, public scrutiny. Walking away was never as simple as it sounded. And Amy knew that. She also knew that disappearing might raise more questions than staying. So she stayed. She pushed through. She told herself she could handle it. Until one day, she couldn't. The moment didn't come with cameras rolling. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't involve a confrontation or an announcement. It happened quietly, in the middle of an ordinary day, when the weight she had been carrying finally tipped the balance. According to insiders, Amy experienced a sudden emotional collapse, not the explosive kind, but the kind that drains you completely. She reportedly became overwhelmed by a sense of hopelessness, so intense it scared her. The thoughts weren't coherent. The feelings weren't logical. It was just too much all at once. For the first time since that day, Amy admitted she was not okay. Not to the cameras. Not to production. To herself. That admission cracked something open. Because once you allow yourself to acknowledge the truth, you can't unknow it. And the truth was this. She had been living in fear for too long. The breakdown that never aired had never ended. It had simply gone underground. And now it was demanding to be dealt with. Admitting it to herself didn't bring relief the way Amy hoped it would. It brought clarity. And clarity, in her state, was terrifying. Because once she stopped pretending she was fine, she could see just how long she hadn't been. The fear hadn't faded with time. It had matured. It had learned how to hide behind routines, responsibilities, and smiles. It had learned how to wait patiently while she convinced herself she was coping. And now that she had finally named it, it felt bigger than ever. Amy didn't tell anyone right away. Not Tammy. Not her family. Not production. She carried the realization quietly, unsure what to do with it. There was a strange sense of guilt attached to it, as if admitting she was struggling meant she had failed some unspoken test of resilience. She had survived worse, hadn't she? That thought haunted her. She replayed the never-aired day in her mind more often now, not as a vivid memory, but as a feeling. The loss of control. The panic. The sense that everything she loved was suddenly at risk. She realized that part of her had been living in that moment ever since, frozen there emotionally even as life moved forward. The realization was painful, but it was also honest. Amy began noticing how deeply that day had shaped her behavior. How every effort to appear stable was rooted in fear. How every suppressed emotion was an attempt to avoid consequences. How her silence wasn't strength, but self-protection taken too far. She wondered when survival had replaced living. Tammy sensed the shift almost immediately. According to those close to them, Tammy noticed that Amy wasn't just tired anymore. She was hollow. There was a difference, and Tammy knew it. One evening, after a long day, Tammy asked Amy a simple question. "Are you scared?" Amy didn't answer right away. The pause said everything. When she finally nodded, the tears came fast and without warning. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, relentless crying that carried months of suppressed fear with it. Tammy sat with her, stunned by how fragile her sister felt. Amy didn't talk about custody. She didn't talk about production. She didn't talk about the footage. She just said she was tired of being afraid. That moment, according to insiders, was the first time Amy allowed someone else to see how much she had been carrying since the breakdown. Tammy listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't minimize it. She didn't try to fix it. She just stayed. That mattered more than anything. Still, fear doesn't disappear because it's acknowledged. It loosens its grip, but it doesn't let go easily. Amy found herself torn between relief and dread. Relief that she wasn't alone anymore. Dread that opening up would set off consequences she couldn't predict. The old fear returned quickly. What if this changed how people saw her? What if admitting vulnerability made her seem unstable again? What if this honesty somehow reached the wrong ears? The paranoia crept back in. Amy hated herself for it. She wanted to trust. She wanted to believe that not every emotion would be used against her. But trust, once broken, doesn't rebuild overnight. Even with Tammy's support, Amy remained cautious. Days passed. Filming continued. Amy showed up as expected, but something subtle had changed. She was no longer just suppressing her fear. She was fighting it. That fight took energy she didn't have. Insiders say Amy appeared more emotional in private, more raw, as if the walls she had built were beginning to crack on their own. She cried more easily. She expressed doubts she had kept hidden for months. It was messy, unpolished, human, and that scared her even more, because messiness had consequences before. Production noticed the shift as well. According to sources, there were conversations about Amy's emotional state. Concerned, but careful. Supportive, but measured. No one wanted a repeat of what had happened. At the same time, there was an unspoken question hanging in the air. Could Amy continue like this? The answer wasn't clear. Amy felt that uncertainty, even if no one said it out loud. It showed in the way people watched her more closely, in the way conversations were framed, in the way decisions were made around her. She felt fragile again, and fragility felt dangerous. At home, the emotional swings became harder to manage. Amy wanted to be present for her children, but fear kept pulling her attention elsewhere. She worried constantly about whether she was doing enough, being enough. The pressure to be perfect grew heavier with each passing day. Perfection became her shield. But shields crack. One night, according to insiders, Amy reached a breaking point. Not the kind captured on camera, but the kind that happens when someone realizes they can't keep going the way they are. She reportedly told Tammy that she didn't trust herself anymore, that she was afraid of her own mind. That admission was devastating. It also marked a turning point, because fear can paralyze, or it can force change. Amy was standing at that crossroads, whether she was ready or not. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope without a net. Amy knew she had reached a point where ignoring her mental and emotional health was no longer an option. Every routine task, every filming session, every interaction with her children or production staff carried the invisible weight of that day, the day that had never aired but never truly ended. Amy's approach began to shift. Small changes first. She started checking in with herself more intentionally, noticing when fear or panic bubbled up. She didn't always succeed at controlling it, but acknowledgement was a start. She realized that suppressing her emotions had only intensified the anxiety. Recognition, even without immediate resolution, offered a glimmer of relief. Tammy remained a steady presence. According to insiders, she encouraged Amy to slow down when needed, to step away from the set if things became too overwhelming, and to prioritize her well-being over any storyline. That support became a lifeline. For the first time in months, Amy felt there might be a path back to some form of emotional equilibrium. But returning to stability wasn't straightforward. The patterns established after the never-aired breakdown were deeply ingrained. Amy had spent months anticipating danger at every turn, constantly evaluating her words, actions, and reactions. That vigilance had become a default setting, a way to survive, but it also prevented her from fully relaxing, even when safety was assured. Production schedules added pressure. Though the crew and executives reportedly tried to accommodate Amy's needs, the show had obligations, timelines, and audiences to consider. Amy often found herself in situations where she had to perform while internally questioning whether the footage from that day, though locked away, could somehow resurface. The idea haunted her relentlessly. Despite this, there were moments of clarity. Amy began to see how the fear she had carried had shaped not just her filming experience, but her daily life. She noticed the ways she had isolated herself, the hypervigilance with her children, the constant self-criticism. She began working on separating the events of that day from her present reality, reminding herself that the danger she felt had been a moment in time, not a permanent state. Tammy, friends, and select family members became partners in this process. According to insiders, they gently encouraged Amy to express vulnerability without fear of judgment. Conversations previously deemed too risky were now approached with care and intention. Amy allowed herself to be heard without immediately apologizing or retracting her feelings, a small but crucial step in reclaiming agency over her life. Even as she made progress, Amy remained aware of the shadow the never-aired footage cast over everything. She recognized that reality television, by design, often prioritizes content over human experience, and that her emotional life had become a commodity at one point. The memory of being documented during the most vulnerable moment of her life lingered like an echo, a reminder of the stakes she had faced and the strength required to continue. Through these steps, Amy began to regain a measure of control, not over what had happened, but over how she responded. She started establishing boundaries with production, asserting her needs, and refusing to participate in scenes or discussions that triggered anxiety or fear. According to insiders, this was met with mixed reactions, some supportive, some cautious, but it ultimately reinforced her sense of agency. At home, subtle shifts became more visible. Amy allowed herself to enjoy small moments with her children without self-judgment. She started expressing emotions openly in safe spaces, laughing more freely, and occasionally even letting herself cry without panic. These moments weren't dramatic or cinematic. They were quiet, private victories against the lingering trauma of that day. Yet the journey was far from linear. Amy faced setbacks. On particularly stressful days, the old fear would resurface, unbidden and intense. She would retreat into herself, questioning whether her children were safe, whether she was strong enough, whether the cameras, or the memory of them, would betray her again. But with support, she began to see these episodes as temporary, moments that didn't define her worth or capacity as a mother. Internally, Amy came to understand a crucial truth. Vulnerability and strength were not mutually exclusive. Her experience had forced her to confront fear at its most raw, and surviving that day, though privately, was a testament to resilience. It wasn't about performing courage for an audience. It was about reclaiming it for herself. In the quiet that followed, Amy slowly began to imagine a future where fear did not dictate every interaction. She could not erase the past, nor could she change the fact that reality television had captured her most vulnerable moment. But she could choose how to live with it, how to protect herself and her children, and how to navigate life with intention and self-awareness. The never-aired footage remained a hidden chapter, a haunting reminder of what she had endured. But Amy's response to it, the gradual reclamation of agency, trust, and emotional presence, marked the beginning of a new narrative. One that was hers to shape, away from judgment, fear, and the pressures of an audience that never fully understood the cost of what they were watching. The process of reclaiming herself wasn't quick, and it certainly wasn't easy. Each day presented a new set of challenges, small and large, that tested Amy's patience, resilience, and sense of safety. What had once been routine, filming a scene, managing her household, interacting with friends, now carried the potential for anxiety and second-guessing. Amy learned to identify triggers. Certain questions from production, even if innocuous, could spark memories of that day when everything felt out of control. She began to notice how her environment affected her mood, from the placement of cameras to the timing of shoots. According to insiders, she developed subtle rituals, breathing exercises, mental affirmations, and scheduled pauses to ground herself before and after filming. Tammy remained a steady presence, guiding her through the rough patches. The sisters reportedly had long, honest conversations about fear, vulnerability, and trust. Tammy reassured Amy that strength wasn't the absence of fear, but the courage to continue despite it. Amy began to internalize that message, slowly allowing herself to act and speak without the constant self-policing that had dominated her behavior for months. Production also adapted, though cautiously. Certain scenes were modified to respect Amy's boundaries. Moments that could escalate stress were reworked or moved off camera. Crew members described this as a delicate balance, maintaining the show's narrative while accommodating a cast member's emotional health, but it was a necessary adjustment. Still, the presence of the hidden footage remained a psychological weight. Amy knew it existed somewhere in the archives, unseen by the public, but she could not shake the feeling that it might surface. That knowledge made vulnerability on camera a constant negotiation. She had to carefully gauge what she could express without fearing that past moments of weakness might be resurrected out of context. Despite this, small victories began to accumulate. Amy allowed herself to express frustration without guilt. She laughed genuinely during filming, even when the cameras were present. She shared candid moments with Tammy and her children, letting emotions flow naturally in private spaces. Each act of authenticity, however minor, reinforced a sense of control and agency that had been absent for so long. Fans, meanwhile, continued to notice subtle shifts in Amy's on-screen demeanor. Some commented that she seemed quieter, more reflective, but still genuine. Others speculated about changes in her energy, wondering if personal challenges were affecting her presence. Few could imagine the depth of what she had endured, and even fewer understood the quiet strength it took to continue performing while managing such intense internal struggle. Amy also began to establish boundaries with her audience, selectively engaging on social media and filtering interactions that triggered anxiety or negative judgment. According to sources, this digital curation was essential for maintaining her mental health. She could connect with supportive fans while protecting herself from speculation, criticism, and invasive curiosity. Over time, the sisters found a new rhythm. Tammy's role as advocate and protector became normalized, creating a buffer between Amy and the pressures of production. Amy's cautious but growing comfort on camera allowed her to participate more fully, even if vulnerability was now selectively expressed. The balance between authenticity and self-preservation became a guiding principle. Professionally, the experience also sparked conversations among the crew about the ethical limits of reality television. Some staff members reportedly reflected on whether certain moments should have been captured at all, or whether intervention might have prevented lasting harm. While the footage remained locked away, its influence subtly changed the production's approach to handling cast members' emotional well-being. Amy, privately, began reframing her own narrative. She acknowledged the breakdown, the fear, and the emotional scars as part of her journey, not a failure, but a test of resilience. She practiced compassion toward herself, allowing for mistakes and acknowledging that perfection was neither possible nor required. Friends and family reported that this self-compassion slowly allowed her to reclaim aspects of her personality that had been muted by fear. She also began to embrace small joys that had been absent for months, playful interactions with her children, casual laughter with friends, moments of quiet reflection. These seemingly minor acts became pillars of stability, reminders that life could continue beyond the shadows of trauma and surveillance. The never-aired footage remained a silent specter, but Amy's growing confidence allowed her to see it less as a threat and more as a testament to her endurance. She had survived that day, and every day afterward, she was building a life where fear no longer dictated her choices. And in the quiet moments, when cameras weren't rolling and judgments weren't looming, Amy began to feel a sense of control she hadn't experienced in months, a fragile, yet growing, assurance that she could navigate life on her own terms. With that fragile sense of control came new realizations. Amy began to understand that her experience was not just about surviving one traumatic day. It was about learning to live authentically within the constraints of a system that could be unforgiving. She recognized that vulnerability was not weakness, but a form of courage that required boundaries, discernment, and intentionality. The sisters' dynamic shifted subtly, but significantly. Tammy continued to act as both protector and sounding board, creating a space where Amy could voice fears without judgment. According to insiders, this partnership became a foundation for rebuilding trust, not only in others, but in herself. Amy could begin to separate the threat of external scrutiny from her internal sense of worth. Amy's approach to filming evolved. She engaged with the cameras differently, no longer performing for approval, but participating with intention. Crew members noticed that she responded to prompts in a more measured way, expressing emotions on her own terms, rather than being reactive. This shift didn't go unnoticed by viewers, who began to comment on her more grounded presence, sensing a change in energy even if they couldn't articulate the reason. At home, Amy focused on rebuilding routines that supported emotional health. She incorporated moments of mindfulness, structured time with her children, and deliberate breaks from both social media and production pressures. According to family sources, these small adjustments contributed to a more stable environment, reducing the constant undercurrent of anxiety that had defined her life after the breakdown. Internally, Amy wrestled with lingering fear, the knowledge that the never-aired footage existed, somewhere beyond her reach. She could not control its presence, but she began to work on controlling her response to it. Therapy, family support, and reflective practices allowed her to acknowledge the past without letting it dictate her every thought. She learned to identify triggers and develop coping strategies to manage emotional surges before they became overwhelming. Tammy's role remained crucial. Sources say Tammy continued to check in daily, helping Amy navigate the complicated intersection of personal vulnerability and public exposure. She reminded Amy that feeling fear was natural, that mistakes did not define her, and that the past, though powerful, did not determine the future. Those reminders gradually built Amy's confidence in her own judgment. Amy also started asserting her boundaries with production more clearly. Scenes that could provoke anxiety were renegotiated or postponed, and she became more vocal about what she needed to feel safe on set. These conversations were not always easy, sometimes met with confusion or resistance, but they were necessary for reclaiming agency over her experience. Meanwhile, the public perception of Amy began to shift subtly. Fans recognized a more reflective, thoughtful presence. Some speculated that life changes had matured her. Others sensed a quiet resilience that had not been visible before. While most remained unaware of the full context, Amy's internal transformation was unmistakable to those who knew the full story. The emotional scars from the breakdown remained. Amy continued to experience anxiety, moments of panic, and fears about custody and judgment. But she was no longer trapped by them. She had developed tools to navigate emotional volatility, strategies to respond rather than react, and allies who supported her without judgment. In private moments, Amy reflected on how far she had come. She acknowledged the trauma of the day that had never aired, but she also celebrated her ability to continue showing up for herself, her children, and her family. That balance of acknowledgement and empowerment became the foundation for a new way of living. The never-aired footage still existed, but it no longer controlled her. Amy had taken steps to ensure that her vulnerability did not remain a source of fear, but instead became a catalyst for growth. She was learning that survival was not just about enduring trauma. It was about reclaiming life, agency, and emotional authenticity despite it. Amy's journey continued to unfold, quietly but profoundly. Months passed, and with each day, the internal tension that had defined her life began to ease, though never completely vanish. The fear of losing her children, of being judged, or of having her most vulnerable moments exposed lingered, but it no longer dictated every decision she made. She found balance in small, deliberate actions. Routine became her anchor. Even simple tasks, preparing meals, bedtime with her children, quiet moments of reflection, were opportunities to reclaim stability. According to insiders, Amy began journaling, documenting thoughts and emotions that had previously gone unspoken. These writings became a private repository of experience, a way to process trauma without external interference. Tammy remained her steadfast support. Their relationship evolved into one of partnership, with mutual understanding and respect. Sources say Tammy's presence allowed Amy to feel safe expressing fear, anger, or frustration without the automatic shame that had once accompanied such emotions. They developed a rhythm of honest conversations, sharing vulnerabilities while reinforcing each other's sense of resilience. Production continued, but Amy approached it differently. She no longer saw filming purely as an obligation or a threat. Instead, She treated it as a controlled space where she could participate on her terms. She began negotiating boundaries proactively, choosing what to reveal, when and in what context. Crew members reportedly noticed her newfound confidence, even if it remained tempered by caution. Public perception began to shift subtly as well. Fans who had observed Amy's quieter demeanor started to comment on her introspection and composure. While few understood the depth of her experience, many sensed authenticity beneath the calm exterior. The contrast between what viewers saw and what had happened off-camera remained stark, yet Amy's careful management of her presence allowed her to maintain control over the narrative. In private life, she prioritized emotional well-being. Friends and family reported that she spent more time nurturing herself, balancing attention to her children with self-care practices. Sleep, nutrition, exercise, and mental health check-ins became deliberate routines rather than sporadic efforts. According to insiders, this consistency played a critical role in stabilizing her overall state of mind. Amy also addressed her relationship with fear directly. She acknowledged the persistent presence of anxiety, but reframed it as a signal rather than a verdict. Where once fear had been paralyzing, it now served as a cue for self-care, reflection, or recalibration. Over time, this reframing helped her regain agency, reducing the sense of being controlled by the memory of that day. Tammy's advocacy extended beyond emotional support. She reportedly helped Amy navigate logistics with production, mediating conversations about scene content, boundaries, and emotional triggers. This support ensured that Amy could participate safely without reliving the trauma of being filmed during her lowest moments. The hidden footage remained a constant, quiet presence. Amy never sought to see it, and the network maintained strict access protocols. Yet, knowing it existed forced her to confront the intersection of vulnerability, privacy, and public exposure. She developed strategies for mental resilience, learning to separate the potential risk from her lived reality. Gradually, Amy began to experience moments of joy that felt unburdened. She played with her children freely, laughed with Tammy, and allowed herself to engage socially without immediate fear of judgment. These moments, while private and understated, marked significant progress in reclaiming a sense of normalcy and self-trust. Amy's path forward remained cautious, deliberate, and intentional. The events of that day, the breakdown that had never aired, would always be part of her story, but they no longer defined it entirely. Instead, they became a reference point, a reminder of her resilience, and a guide for navigating the complexities of public life, motherhood, and personal well-being. Amy's journey toward stability and self-trust continued, but the challenges were ongoing. The months after the breakdown were filled with moments of growth and setbacks alike. Every interaction, whether with family, production, or the public, carried traces of the fear and trauma she had endured. Yet slowly, she was learning to navigate life without being defined by that single day. One of the key changes was how Amy interacted with her children. Previously, the anxiety surrounding her own vulnerability often translated into overcaution or hypervigilance in parenting. Now, she approached motherhood with greater presence and intention. She allowed herself to enjoy their milestones without immediate judgment or fear, savoring moments of laughter, play, and connection. According to insiders, this shift brought relief not just to Amy, but to her children as well, creating a more harmonious home environment. Amy also strengthened her emotional toolkit. Therapy, self-reflection, and honest conversations with trusted friends and family became essential. She learned to recognize early signs of stress, to employ coping strategies proactively, and to validate her own feelings without self-criticism. Each small victory reinforced a growing sense of resilience that had previously been buried beneath fear. Tammy continued to be an anchor, offering guidance and advocacy. She reminded Amy that it was acceptable to set limits, to step away when needed, and to prioritize her well-being above all else. The sisters reportedly spent hours discussing boundaries, self-care, and trust, with Tammy offering both emotional support and practical advice for navigating production and family dynamics. Production adapted as well. Scenes were structured to respect Amy's mental health, and crew members reportedly approached her with increased sensitivity. The network maintained strict protocols regarding the never-aired footage, ensuring it remained securely archived and inaccessible. These measures allowed Amy to engage more fully on camera without the omnipresent fear of exposure or judgment. Publicly, Amy's persona evolved. Viewers noticed a more reflective, measured presence on screen. While still authentic, her vulnerability was now expressed in controlled, intentional ways. Fans responded positively, commenting on her apparent composure and growth, unaware of the full depth of the private struggles she had endured. Despite progress, moments of fear and anxiety persisted. Amy occasionally experienced intense reminders of that day, the sudden surge of panic, the feeling of being observed, or the flash of past helplessness. But unlike before, she no longer allowed these feelings to dictate her actions entirely. Instead, she used them as signals to pause, reflect, and implement coping strategies. Social media, once a source of anxiety, became a carefully curated space for connection. Amy selectively engaged with fans, filtering interactions to minimize stress while still maintaining a public presence. This approach allowed her to reclaim some control over her narrative without being overwhelmed by external judgment or speculation. The experience also reshaped her relationship with fame. Where once she felt trapped by cameras and public scrutiny, Amy began to view her platform as a tool she could use intentionally. She could participate, share her journey, and connect with others while maintaining boundaries that protected her mental and emotional health. Above all, Amy learned the importance of self-compassion. She recognized that survival was not a measure of perfection, but of perseverance. Her breakdown, once a source of shame and fear, became a marker of strength, a testament to her ability to endure and to rebuild in the aftermath of trauma. The never-aired footage remained a silent reminder of vulnerability, but Amy's life no longer revolved around it. She had developed resilience, agency, and a sense of safety that allowed her to move forward while honoring her experience. With each passing week, Amy's confidence in navigating both her personal life and public presence grew. The trauma of that day, the breakdown that had never aired, remained a part of her story, but it no longer held the same paralyzing power. She had learned to distinguish between past threats and present realities, and that distinction became a foundation for rebuilding her sense of self. Amy's interactions with her children became more intuitive and present. According to insiders, she allowed herself to experience joy alongside them, to laugh without immediately calculating consequences, and to provide comfort without internalizing constant fear. These small moments, previously overshadowed by anxiety, were transformative both for her and for her family. Tammy's role continued to be vital. The sisters reportedly established a pattern of regular check-ins, honest conversations, and mutual support. Tammy encouraged Amy to express fears openly, to set boundaries firmly, and to trust her instincts as a mother and as a participant on the show. That trust, gradually rebuilt, became a lifeline for Amy, allowing her to navigate both the pressures of reality television and the challenges of motherhood with greater ease. Production adjusted to her needs, creating an environment that prioritized emotional safety. Crew members followed stricter protocols, respecting Amy's boundaries and minimizing triggers whenever possible. The network maintained the never-aired footage securely locked away, acknowledging the ethical implications of what had been captured. This allowed Amy to participate on camera without the pervasive fear that her most vulnerable moments could resurface. Public perception evolved as well. Fans noticed a shift in Amy's demeanor. She appeared calmer, more grounded, and more deliberate in her interactions. While many speculated about personal growth or life changes, few could grasp the depth of her private struggles and the strength it had taken to continue participating fully in the show. Amy also became more intentional about her mental health outside of filming. She incorporated consistent therapy, reflection, and structured self-care into her daily life. She developed strategies to cope with moments of anxiety, grounding herself through breathing exercises, journaling, and mindful observation of her thoughts. These tools enabled her to respond rather than react, transforming fear into a manageable signal rather than an overwhelming force. Even though moments of fear and doubt persisted, Amy no longer allowed them to dominate her existence. She had learned to navigate emotional volatility with patience, self-compassion, and support. The breakdown that had haunted her for so long became a reference point rather than a chain, reminding her of the resilience she possessed and the lessons learned from surviving such an intense ordeal. Her relationship with social media became a tool rather than a threat. Amy selectively engaged with fans, sharing insights into her journey while protecting herself from judgment and speculation. This careful curation reinforced her sense of agency and allowed her to maintain a positive connection with her audience without sacrificing emotional safety. Above all, Amy embraced self-compassion. She acknowledged that perfection was neither attainable nor necessary. Survival, growth, and authenticity became the markers of strength she valued. The experience of being captured in her most vulnerable state, though never aired, became a catalyst for learning, self-awareness, and ultimately empowerment. The hidden footage remained a silent specter, a reminder of the fragility of vulnerability under constant observation. Yet Amy no longer defined herself by it. She had reclaimed agency over her life, her emotions, and her interactions, demonstrating that even the most painful experiences could be transformed into sources of resilience and wisdom. Amy's transformation was not sudden. It was a slow, deliberate process, marked by small but meaningful shifts in how she lived her life. The lingering presence of the never-aired footage continued to remind her of the fragility of vulnerability, yet she gradually learned to carry that memory without letting it control her. Daily routines became acts of empowerment. From preparing meals and organizing her household to spending quality time with her children, Amy approached life with intentionality. Each choice, no matter how minor, reinforced her sense of agency and control. According to insiders, these rituals provided a grounding effect, helping her navigate the unpredictability of both motherhood and reality television. Tammy remained a steadfast presence. The sisters developed a dynamic built on honesty, support, and mutual respect. Tammy encouraged Amy to express emotions freely, validate her own experiences, and establish boundaries with production and public exposure. This partnership helped Amy rebuild trust in herself, in her family, and in her ability to navigate challenges. Production adapted further. Scenes that could provoke stress were adjusted or moved off camera. Crew members followed strict protocols regarding emotional support, while the network maintained the locked status of the hidden footage. These measures allowed Amy to participate without the constant fear that her vulnerability could be exploited or exposed. Publicly, Amy's growth became subtly visible. Fans noted a calmer, more reflective presence on screen. While they speculated about life changes or personal growth, few could fully comprehend the emotional labor she had undertaken behind the scenes. The measured authenticity that emerged was a product of conscious effort and resilience, not mere performance. Amy's mental health practices deepened. Therapy sessions, journaling, and mindfulness exercises became integral to her daily life. She learned to anticipate triggers, employ coping mechanisms, and separate past trauma from present experiences. These strategies allowed her to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively to stress, fear, or anxiety. The sisters' relationship flourished under these conditions. Moments of shared laughter, quiet reflection, and emotional openness strengthened their bond. Tammy's advocacy provided a safety net, enabling Amy to navigate both personal and professional pressures without feeling entirely exposed or at risk. Amy also refined her interaction with social media. By curating her engagement carefully, she could connect with fans meaningfully while protecting herself from speculation, judgment, and unwanted attention. This selective exposure reinforced her sense of control and allowed her to participate on her own terms. Gradually, Amy embraced the concept of self-compassion. She recognized that surviving trauma, maintaining authenticity, and caring for her children were achievements in their own right. She no longer measured her worth solely by performance or public perception, but by her resilience, intentionality, and capacity for growth. The hidden footage remained locked away, a quiet testament to the intensity of what she had endured. Yet Amy no longer allowed it to define her daily existence. She had reclaimed her agency, rebuilt her sense of safety, and cultivated a life that honored both her experiences and her aspirations. Her journey, while ongoing, reflected a profound truth. Vulnerability, once confronted with support, reflection, and intentional action, could transform from a source of fear into a foundation for strength, authenticity, and empowerment. The final chapter of Amy's journey, while still unfolding, marked a significant evolution in both her personal and public life. Months after the breakdown that had never aired, Amy had begun to fully reclaim her sense of agency, stability, and emotional presence. The experience had left scars, but it also created a foundation for resilience, reflection, and intentional living. Amy's relationship with her children became central to her renewed focus. She prioritized presence over perfection, allowing herself to be both a protective mother and an emotionally engaged parent. According to insiders, she approached each day with a mindful awareness of how her actions and emotions impacted her children, balancing care with self-preservation. Tammy's unwavering support continued to be instrumental. The sisters developed a rhythm of shared understanding, open communication, and advocacy. Tammy reminded Amy that expressing vulnerability was not weakness, and that boundaries were essential for maintaining emotional health. This bond allowed Amy to navigate challenges with confidence, knowing she had an ally who understood the depth of her experiences. Production remained cautious, yet accommodating. Scenes that might trigger anxiety were adapted, and crew members maintained heightened awareness of Amy's comfort and boundaries. The never-aired footage remained securely archived, a reminder of the past, but no longer a source of immediate fear. These measures allowed Amy to participate on camera with greater confidence and composure. Privately, Amy continued to refine her coping strategies. Therapy, mindfulness, journaling, and reflective practices became consistent pillars of support. She developed the ability to identify triggers, process emotions constructively, and separate past trauma from present circumstances. Each small victory reinforced her sense of self-efficacy and emotional resilience. Publicly, Amy's presence evolved into one of quiet strength. Fans observed a more measured, grounded persona, often commenting on her composure, thoughtfulness, and authenticity. While few could grasp the full depth of her private struggles, the subtle growth was evident. Her ability to engage with viewers without being defined by past vulnerability demonstrated remarkable resilience. Amy also redefined her relationship with social media. By selectively engaging, she could connect with supporters while protecting herself from speculation, judgment, or intrusive commentary. This careful balance allowed her to maintain a positive public profile without sacrificing emotional well-being. Most importantly, Amy embraced self-compassion fully. She recognized that her worth was not determined by flawless performance, public perception, or avoidance of fear. Survival, authenticity, and intentional engagement with life became her measures of strength. The breakdown that had once haunted her had transformed into a testament to her endurance, courage, and capacity for growth. The never-aired footage, though still present in the archives, no longer controlled Amy's life. She had reclaimed the narrative of her story, balancing her personal needs, professional obligations, and family responsibilities. Her resilience, intentionality, and emotional authenticity now defined her journey more than any single moment of vulnerability ever could. In the end, Amy's experience revealed a profound truth about reality television, motherhood, and human endurance. Vulnerability, once met with reflection, support, and boundaries, can be transformed into empowerment. Amy Slaton's story, marked by hidden pain and unrecognized courage, stands as a testament to survival, growth, and the delicate balance between being real and being safe. Her journey is ongoing, but the woman viewers see today is stronger, wiser, and more self-aware, a living example that even the most painful, private moments can be reclaimed and transformed into a source of resilience, strength, and hope.